3 days after the assassination attempt, the palace of the Valorian Empire was a different place than it had been when the human ambassador first arrived. The Sethrak warlord and his surviving warriors had been captured trying to flee the system, and they now waited in the deep cells beneath the palace for whatever justice the Emperor would deliver. The Crixian delegation had departed in disgrace after evidence emerged of their involvement in the plot, and the hive commander who had mocked the human ambassador would face execution upon her return home. And humans, the species that every civilized world had dismissed as prey animals unworthy of respect, had become the subject of urgent meetings and hurried communications across the entire sector. Sora found the human ambassador in his small room in the servants' wing, packing his few belongings for his departure later that day. "You are leaving," she said from the doorway. "My mission here is complete," June replied. "The treaty negotiations concluded successfully this morning, and your father was very accommodating given recent events. You saved his life. He could hardly refuse your terms." June smiled his gentle smile and continued packing. "I did not save his life to gain leverage," he said. "I saved his life because it was the right thing to do." The treaty terms were fair before the assassination attempt, and they remained fair afterward. Sora stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "May I ask you something that has been bothering me?" she said. "Of course. Why did you tolerate it?" she asked. "The insults, the mistreatment, the disrespect. You had the power to demand better treatment from the moment you arrived. Why did you let us treat you like prey when you were clearly anything but?" June stopped packing and turned to face her, and his expression was thoughtful rather than guarded. "We do not need others to know we are dangerous," he said. "We know, and that is enough. We save our teeth for those who threaten what we love, never for those who merely wound our pride." "That sounds like wisdom, but it also sounds like deception," she said. "You hid what you were and let us believe a lie." "I hid nothing," he said. "I simply did not correct your assumptions. There is a difference. I never claimed to be weak. I never said humans were prey. I simply existed as I am and allowed others to interpret what they saw." He sat down on the narrow bed that had been his only furniture for weeks and gestured for her to take the single chair. "Let me tell you something about Earth," he said. "About what we learned during our long climb from prey to predator." Sora sat and listened. "In the early days, we were nothing special," June said. "We were slow and soft and weak, and everything on our world wanted to eat us. We survived by hiding and running, and hoping that something else would be caught before we were. But then you became hunters, eventually." "Yes, but first we became something else. We became patient. We learned to watch and wait and remember. We studied the things that hunted us until we knew them better than they knew themselves. And then we used that knowledge to turn the tables." He paused and his eyes grew distant, as if he was seeing something far away. "We drove many species to extinction in those days," he said. "The great cats that had made our ancestors fear the night. The massive predators that had ruled the plains. The cunning pack hunters that had coordinated to bring us down. All of them gone because we refused to stop hunting them. The files I read said as much. But what the files probably did not say is what came after," June continued. "When we had killed everything that threatened us, we felt something unexpected. We felt loss. We felt regret. We realized that in our determination to survive, we had destroyed things that could never be replaced. And so you changed, slowly and imperfectly. Yes, we began to protect the descendants of our former enemies. We built places where predators could live without fearing human hunters. We spent resources and effort to undo some of the damage we had caused." He looked at her directly, and she saw something in his eyes that was neither the gentle ambassador nor the cold predator. Something that was simply and purely human. "That is what it means to be human," he said. "We are capable of terrible destruction, but also capable of choosing to stop. We are predators who learn mercy. Hunters who learn conservation. Killers who learn to protect. That sounds like a contradiction. It is, he agreed. Humans are full of contradictions, we never fully resolve them. We simply carry them with us and try to choose wisely when the moment of decision arrives. Sora thought about this for a long moment. What will happen now? She asked. Between our peoples, my father was terrified by what he saw you do. And fear can lead to foolish choices. That is why I'm leaving, June said. My presence here reminds everyone of what they witnessed. It is better for me to go and let time soften the memory. Will you come back? If I am needed, he said. Humans do not abandon those we consider friends. And despite everything that happened here, I believe our peoples can be friends. If we are given the chance, he stood and resumed his packing. And Sora understood that their conversation was coming to an end. One last question, she said. Ask it. When you walked toward the assassins that night, were you afraid at all? June paused with a folded shirt in his hands, and his gentle smile flickered for just a moment. Terrified, he admitted. I knew I might die. I knew I was outnumbered and outmatched by any reasonable measure. And a part of me wanted very badly to run. But you did not run. No, he said. Because running would have meant watching your father die. And I had decided that I would not allow that to happen. Once a human makes that decision, fear becomes irrelevant. We move forward because we have chosen to move forward. And nothing stops us until the task is done or we are dead. He finished packing and lifted his small bag. That is the truth of humanity. Princess, he said, we are not the strongest or the fastest or the most powerful. But we are the most stubborn. We are the species that refuses to stop. We followed our prey across continents, and we outlasted predators that should have killed us. And we did it all because we decided that we would not give up. Sora walked with him to the landing platform, where a human transport waited to take him home. The Emperor was there, surrounded by guards who now looked at the small, soft ambassador with a mixture of fear and respect. Ambassador, the Emperor said formally, the Valorian Empire thanks you for your service, and we look forward to a long and peaceful relationship between our peoples. June bowed as he had bowed when he first arrived. But now everyone understood that the bow was a choice rather than a submission. Thank you, Your Majesty, he said. Humanity is honored to call the Valorian Empire our friends. He walked up the ramp of his transport and paused at the top to look back at Sora. I have sent you something, he said. A data packet containing the full history of humanity's rise on Earth. Everything we hunted, everything we destroyed, everything we protected, I think you will find it educational. The ramp closed and the transport lifted off, and Sora watched it disappear into the amber clouds of her world. That night she found the data packet waiting in her personal files, and she began to read. She read about the great cats brought down by persistent hunters who followed them until they could run no more. She read about the massive predators driven to extinction by creatures that should have been nothing more than food. She read about the wars and the famines and the plagues, and how humanity had survived them all through sheer stubborn refusal to die. And she read about the moment when humans looked at what they had done and decided to be different, to protect instead of destroy, to preserve instead of consume. When dawn broke over the spires of the palace, Sora finally understood everything. The apex predators had backed away because they recognized what the civilized galaxy had forgotten. The most dangerous predator in the universe is not the one with the sharpest claws or the strongest armor or the deadliest venom. The most dangerous predator is the one that learned to smile while it hunts, the one that chooses its prey with careful thought, the one that never stops and never forgets, and never gives up until the hunt is done. The most dangerous predator is the one that could destroy everything but chooses instead to protect, and that predator had just become her. People's Elisora closed the files and began to write a report for her father. A report that would change how the Valorian Empire viewed humans forever. The prey animal had taught her something that no amount of strength could provide. True power is not the ability to destroy. True power is the choice to show mercy, and humans had mastered that power long before they ever reached for the stars. The grand feast celebrating the successful hunt filled the great hall with the most powerful beings in the sector. And Sora moved through the crowd with her senses on high alert after what she had seen the night before. The mobilization had been a false alarm, merely increased security for the feast. But she could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Crixian delegation clustered in one corner, their wounded hive commander still bearing the marks of her encounter with the Razorwings. And they spoke in low clicking sounds that Sora could not translate. The Sethrak warlord sat with his warriors near the main doors, their reptilian eyes constantly scanning the room, and their tails twitched with an agitation that seemed excessive for a simple celebration. And the human ambassador sat alone at a small table near the back of the hall, eating little and watching everything with those patient ancient eyes that Sora now recognized for what they were. She made her way to her father's side at the high table where the Emperor presided over the feast like the apex predator he believed himself to be. "Father," she said quietly, "I need to speak with you about the human." "Later," he said without looking at her. "Tonight we celebrate, and tomorrow we can discuss whatever concerns you have about the prey animal." "Father, he's not what he appears to be. I have learned things that you need to hear." The Emperor turned to look at her with irritation in his golden eyes. "Sora, I have entertained your fascination with this creature long enough. Humans are weak and irrelevant, and I will not waste my time on your fantasies about hidden dangers." Before she could respond, the great doors of the hall burst open and armed Sethrak warriors poured into the room with weapons drawn and murder in their eyes. The Sethrak warlord rose from his seat and pointed at the Emperor with a blade that gleamed in the torchlight. "Today the false throne of the Valorian Empire falls," he roared. "Today we reclaim the honor that was stolen from us, and today your bloodline ends." Chaos erupted as Valorian guards moved to intercept the attackers, and guests scrambled for cover, and screams filled the air. Sora drew her own blade and tried to reach her father, but the surge of bodies pushed her back, and she watched in horror as the assassins cut down guard after guard while advancing toward the high table. The Emperor fought with the fury of his ancestors, his claws and blade taking down 3 attackers before a blow from behind sent him crashing to the ground. And suddenly, he was surrounded by Sethrak warriors with their weapons pointed at his throat. "Hold," the warlord commanded. "I want him to see his empire fall before he dies." Sora fought desperately to reach her father, but there were too many bodies between them, and she could only watch as the warlord raised his blade for the killing stroke. Then she saw the human. He was walking toward the assassins surrounding the Emperor. Not running, not rushing, just walking with that same unhurried pace he used when moving through the palace gardens. His face held no fear and no anger, only that terrible stillness she had learned to recognize. The lead assassin saw him coming and laughed at the sight of this soft, small creature approaching a wall of armed warriors. "Look," he called to his companions. "The prey animal wants to play hero." He lunged at June with his blade raised high, confident in his superior speed and strength and training. And Sora wanted to scream a warning, even though she knew it would be useless. What happened next was too fast for her eyes to follow. One moment the assassin was attacking. The next moment he was on the ground with his arm bent at an impossible angle, and his blade in the human's hand. June did not pause or hesitate. He simply moved to the next attacker with the fluid grace of water flowing downhill. And every movement was precise and economical and devastatingly effective. he did not fight like a warrior. Sora realized he did not meet strength with strength or fury with fury. He fought like a predator that had studied its prey for generations and knew exactly where every weakness lay. A blade thrust was redirected into another attacker. A charging warrior was sent tumbling into his companions. A reaching hand was caught and twisted until bones snapped. And through it all, the human's expression never changed. 4 assassins fell in the time it took Sora to draw a breath. And then 5, and then 6. And the remaining attackers turned away from the Emperor to face this new and unexpected threat. June stood among the bodies with blood on his hands and borrowed blade. And he was not even breathing hard. He looked at the remaining assassins, and they looked back at him. And Sora saw something she had never expected to see in the eyes of Sethrak warriors. She saw fear apex predators from a species that had conquered worlds and slaughtered millions. Warriors who had never known retreat or surrender. And they were afraid of one small soft human who should have been nothing more than easy prey. "Leave now," June said, and his voice was quiet and calm. "Take your wounded and go. And do not come back." For a moment the assassins hesitated, and Sora thought they might attack anyway out of pride or desperation. Then one of them broke and ran, and the others followed, fleeing through the doors they had entered with such confidence just moments before. Sethrak Warlord tried to rally them, but they did not listen. And soon he was alone facing the human who had dismantled his entire attack in less than a minute. "What are you?" The warlord hissed. June did not answer. He simply looked at the warlord with those patient, ancient eyes. And the warlord's nerve broke just like his warriors he fled into. The night in the hall fell silent except for the groans of the wounded and the heavy breathing of those who had survived. The Emperor rose slowly from where he had fallen, his golden eyes fixed on the human who had saved his life. And his voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "What are you?" he asked. Echoing the warlord's question, June wiped the blood from his hands on his simple gray clothing, and the gentle smile returned to his face like a mask sliding back into place. "Just a human." "Your Majesty," he said, "we are very protective of those we consider friends." He handed the borrowed blade to a nearby guard and walked back to his small table at the back of the hall as if nothing unusual had happened. Emperor stared after him for a long moment, and then he turned to look at Sora with eyes that held something she had never seen in her father before. She saw uncertainty. "You said you had things to tell me about the human," he said quietly. "Yes, Father," she replied. "I think perhaps now you are ready to listen." Around them the chaos of the aftermath continued. Guards securing the hall, and healers tending to the wounded, and nobles demanding explanations. But Sora kept her eyes on the human ambassador, who sat alone at his table and resumed eating his meal as if he had not just changed everything. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and tonight they had been given their first real glimpse of the truth. Sora wondered how many more lessons would be needed before everyone understood what she was only beginning to comprehend. The gentle smile, the soft voice, the bowing head, none of it was weakness. It was camouflage. Behind that camouflage was something that had hunted every apex predator on its homeworld to extinction. Something that never stopped and never forgot and never forgave those who threatened what it loved. The Valorian Empire had been given a warning tonight, written in blood and broken bodies. She could only hope that her people were wise enough to heed it. Sora spent the following days watching the human ambassador with new eyes. And the more she watched, the more she understood how completely she had been fooled. He moved through the palace like water flowing around stones, soft and yielding and utterly unthreatening. And everyone who encountered him dismissed him just as she had done. But now she noticed the things she had missed before. She noticed how his eyes tracked every movement in a room, how he positioned himself near exits without seeming to do so on purpose, how he cataloged faces in conversations and relationships with the quiet patience of a predator learning the patterns of its territory. She noticed how he never truly relaxed, how even when he appeared at ease, there was a stillness in his body, like a coiled spring waiting for release. And she recognized that stillness because she had seen it in the great hunters of her own world. The other delegates continued to mock him and push him and treat him like the prey animal they believed him to be. And he accepted all of it with his usual gentle grace. But Sora no longer saw weakness in his acceptance. She saw a strategy on the 5th night after the hunt. She followed him to the palace gardens, where he sat alone on a stone bench surrounded by the strange night-blooming flowers that grew only on Keth Prime. Small creatures emerged from the shadows as she watched. Tiny 6-legged things that normally fled from any larger predator. And they approached the human without fear. He held out his hand, and they climbed onto his palm and ate the seeds he offered them. And their tiny eyes looked up at him with trust that seemed impossible, given what she now knew he was. "You can come out, Princess," he said without turning around. "I heard you following me from the east corridor." She stepped out of the shadows and walked toward him. And she did not try to hide her confusion. "How do you do that?" she asked. "The creatures in the preserve fled from you like you were death itself. But these little ones come to you like you are their protector." "Both things are true," he said. "Humans learned long ago the difference between something that must be killed and something that must be protected. We are capable of great violence, but we are also capable of great gentleness. And we choose which to show based on what we encounter. What decides which is which?" she asked as she sat down on the bench beside him. He looked at her, and she saw that ancient coldness behind his eyes. The same thing she had glimpsed on the balcony that first night. And she understood that she was looking at something far older and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. "We do," he said. "We always have. That is what it means to be human. We are not slaves to our instincts. We choose what we hunt and what we shelter. And that choice is what makes us who we are. The files I read said that humans drove many species on your world to extinction," she said. "They said you hunted creatures far larger and more powerful than yourselves until none remained." "That is true," he admitted. "In our early history, we were not wise. We killed everything that threatened us and many things that did not. We painted our caves with images of our victories, and we celebrated the death of every predator that ever made us afraid. And now? Now we protect the descendants of the very creatures that once hunted us," he said. "We build sanctuaries for predators that would kill us without hesitation if given the chance. We spend resources and effort to ensure that the things that once made us prey never disappear from our world." He let the small creatures climb down from his hands, and they scurried back into the shadows. And he watched them go with something that looked almost like affection. "Humans are strange," Sora said. "You are predators who protect prey, killers who preserve life. I do not understand how both things can be true at once." "We are complicated," he agreed. "We contain contradictions that we have never fully resolved. We are capable of the most terrible cruelty and the most extraordinary compassion. And we never know which one will emerge until the moment of choice arrives." "That sounds exhausting," she said. "It is," he said with a small laugh that seemed genuine for the first time since she had met him. "Being human is very tiring. We constantly argue with ourselves about what we should do and who we should be. We build civilizations and then tear them down. We create beauty and then destroy it. We are our own greatest allies and our own worst enemies." Sora considered this for a long moment. And then she asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the hunt. "Are humans dangerous to my people?" June turned to look at her directly, and his gentle smile faded into something more serious. "That depends entirely on your people," he said. "Humans do not seek conflict. We do not desire conquest. We do not dream of ruling other species. What we want is to live in peace and to be left alone to figure out our own contradictions. But if someone threatens you, then we become the thing that every predator on our world learned to fear," he said. "We become patient and relentless and utterly without mercy. We track our enemies across whatever distance is necessary. We wait for as long as it takes. And when the moment comes, we strike without hesitation." He paused, and the cold thing behind his eyes seemed to grow stronger. "The creatures on Earth that threatened us are gone now," he said. "Not because we were stronger or faster or more powerful, but because we refused to stop. We followed them until they collapsed. We hunted them until there was nowhere left to hide. And we did all of this while smiling because that is what humans do." Sora felt a chill run down her spine despite the warm night air. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Why reveal what you are when you have been hiding it so carefully? Because you are the first person here who actually looked," he said. "Everyone else sees what they expect to see, a weak creature that can be dismissed and ignored. But you looked deeper. You asked questions. You paid attention. That does not explain why you would trust me with this knowledge." "I am not trusting you," he said. "I am warning you. Because I think you are smart enough to hear the warning and wise enough to pass it on to those who need to hear it." He stood up and brushed the garden soil from his simple gray clothing. "Your empire is at a crossroads. Princess," he said, "you can continue to see humans as prey and treat us accordingly. Or you can recognize what we actually are and adjust your approach. And what happens if we choose wrong?" He smiled at her. The same gentle smile he had worn since the moment he arrived. But now she saw the teeth hidden behind it. "Then you will learn why the apex predators backed away," he said. "And by the time you understand, it will be far too late to change your choice." He walked back toward the palace, leaving her alone in the garden with the small creatures that emerged again from the shadows. Now that the human was gone, Sora sat there for a long time, thinking about everything he had said and everything she had learned. And when she finally returned to her chambers, she knew that she needed to speak to her father. Emperor needed to hear this warning before it was too late. But when she reached her father's quarters, she found the palace guards mobilizing for something, and the look on their faces told her that the warning might already have come too late. Something terrible was about to happen, and she did not yet know what role the gentle human ambassador would play when violence finally arrived. The announcement came 3 days later when the emperor declared a grand hunt in honor of all visiting delegates. And Sora knew immediately that this was designed to humiliate the human ambassador in front of the entire galaxy. The imperial hunting ground stretched across an entire continent, filled with the most dangerous predators from 100 conquered worlds. And every species that called itself civilized sent their strongest warriors to prove their worth in those ancient forests. Sora had hunted there since she was barely old enough to hold a blade, and she had seen seasoned warriors carried out in pieces by creatures that knew no fear and showed no mercy. When she arrived at the assembly point where the hunting parties were forming, she found Ambassador June standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, dressed in simple gray clothing that made him look even smaller and more fragile among the massive predators. Gathered around him, Crixian Hive Commander towered nearby, her insectoid body covered in chitinous armor that could stop a plasma bolt, and her mandibles clicked with anticipation as she selected her hunting weapons. On the other side stood a Sethrak warlord, his reptilian scales gleaming like polished emeralds, and his tail twitched with barely contained aggression as he sized up the competition. Both of them looked at the human like he was already dead, and Sora could not blame them for this assessment. "Princess Sora," her father called from his elevated platform, "you will accompany the human ambassador during the hunt, and you will ensure he returns alive if possible. though I suspect nature will take its course regardless." Laughter rippled through the assembled delegates and warriors, and Sora felt her face burn with shame at being assigned to protect this weakling while real hunters pursued real. Glory June walked over to her with his usual unhurried pace and offered her a small bow. "Thank you for looking after me," he said. "I know this must be frustrating for you, and I will try to stay out of your way." "Just do exactly as I say," she snapped. "Do not wander off, do not make noise, and when I tell you to run, you run without hesitation or questions. Do you understand?" "I understand completely," he said. The hunt began with the sounding of the great horns, and hunting parties scattered into the wilderness in search of worthy prey. And Sora led her pathetic charge into the deepest part of the forest, where she hoped they could simply hide until the hunt was over. But as they moved through the undergrowth, she noticed something that did not match her expectations. The human moved quietly, more quietly than seemed possible for a creature with no natural stealth adaptations. And his feet found solid ground without snapping twigs or rustling leaves. As if by instinct, he noticed things before she did, his head turning toward sounds she had not yet registered, his eyes tracking movement in the shadows that her keen predator vision had missed. "There," he said softly, pointing to a patch of disturbed soil. "Something large passed through here recently, moving fast. Probably hunting." Sora examined the tracks and realized he was right, and she looked at him with new curiosity. "How did you see that before I did?" she asked. "Humans have always been hunters," he said simply. "We had to be. Our world was not kind to us." She wanted to ask more, but a sound in the distance made her freeze, and her hand went to her blade as she recognized the distinctive clicking of a thornback. Moving through the forest, thornbacks were among the deadliest creatures in the preserve. Six-legged nightmares covered in venomous spines that could kill with a single scratch, and they had been known to take down entire hunting parties of experienced warriors. "We need to move," she whispered, slowly and quietly. "There is a thornback nearby, and if it catches our scent, we are in serious trouble." But even as she spoke, the clicking grew louder, and she knew they had already been detected. The creature emerged from the shadows ahead of them, and it was even larger than she had feared. Easily 3 times her size, with spines that dripped with venom and eyes that burned with predatory hunger. It had their scent, and it was not going to let them go. "Run," she told the human as she drew her blade. "I will hold it off as long as I can. Find the other hunting parties and tell them what happened." She expected him to flee. She hoped he would flee, because she could not fight this thing and protect him at the same time. But he did not run. Instead, he stepped forward, past her, toward the thornback that was already lowering its body into an attack stance. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Are you insane? Get behind me." The human did not respond, and he did not move back. He simply stood there and looked at the thornback, and the thornback looked at him. Something passed between them in that moment, something Sora could not see or understand. And she watched in disbelief as the deadliest predator in the preserve began to back away. Its legs moved in reverse, its spines flattened against its body, and its eyes never left the human as it retreated into the shadows from which it had come. The clicking faded into the distance, and then there was only silence. Sora stared at the human ambassador, at this small, soft creature who had just made an apex predator flee without lifting a finger, and she could not find words for what she had witnessed. "What did you do?" she finally managed to ask. June turned to look at her, and his expression was calm and untroubled, as if nothing unusual had happened. "Animals understand things that civilizations have forgotten," he said. "They remember what their ancestors knew. The old warnings passed down through blood and instinct." "That is not an answer," she said. "It is the only answer I have," he replied with his gentle smile. "Shall we continue, Princess? I believe the hunt is still ongoing." They walked on through the forest, And every predator they encountered did the same thing the Thornback had done. They looked at the human and they backed away. Some fled before he even saw them, crashing through the undergrowth in desperate retreat. And Sora felt the fur on her neck standing up as she realized that something was very wrong with everything she thought. She knew when they returned to the assembly point at sunset, they found chaos waiting for them. The Crixian hive commander had been badly wounded by a pack of razorwings, and 2 members of the Sethrak hunting party had not returned at all. But the human ambassador walked out of the deadliest hunting ground in the sector without a single scratch, and the other delegates stared at him with expressions that had shifted from contempt to something that looked almost like fear. "Lucky," the Sethrak warlord growled. The prey animal got lucky, but Sora saw the way the warlord's tail twitched when he said it, and she knew he did not believe his own words. That night she went to the palace archives and accessed the restricted files on humanity. And what she found there kept her awake until dawn. Persistence predators. The file said, they do not chase, they follow. For hours and days and weeks, until their prey collapses from exhaustion and terror, they conquered their world, not through strength, but through patience, hunting every apex predator that threatened them until none remained. The last thing a prey animal sees before a human kills it. One report noted, is often a smile. Sora closed the files and sat alone in the darkness of the archive chamber. And she finally understood why the Thornback had backed away. It had recognized what she had failed to see, what the whole galaxy had failed to see. The truth hiding behind gentle smiles and soft voices and bowing heads. The human was not prey. He had never been prey, and now she needed to figure out what that meant for her people and for everyone else who had made the mistake of underestimating Earth. Princess Sora. Velen stood at the landing platform and watched the human transport descend through the amber clouds of Keth Prime. And she did not bother to hide her disgust. Her father, the Emperor, had given her this assignment as punishment, though he called it an honor. And she knew exactly what message he was sending to both her and a pathetic species whose ambassadors she would escort. Humans were nothing. Everyone in the galaxy knew this. And being forced to babysit their representative was the greatest insult the Emperor could deliver without actually stripping her of her title. The transport touched down with a soft hiss of landing thrusters, and Sora straightened her spine and let her claws extend slightly, a subtle display of dominance that any civilized species would recognize. The ramp lowered and the human ambassador walked out into the harsh sunlight of her world, and Sora felt her ears flatten against her skull in disappointment. He was small, barely reaching her shoulder, with soft brown skin and black hair and eyes that seemed to hold no fire at all. And he moved with careful, measured steps like prey, trying not to attract attention. "Ambassador June Hawan of Earth," he said, and his voice was quiet and gentle as he bowed deeply before her. "I am honored to meet you, Princess Sora Velen, and I thank the Valorian Empire for receiving me." Sora stared at him and did not return the bow, because among her people, only the weak lowered their heads. And she waited for him to realize his mistake and correct his posture. He simply remained bent at the waist, patient and still, until she finally spoke. "You may rise," she said, making her voice as cold as the northern glaciers. "I am to be your escort during your stay, Ambassador, and I suggest you keep pace with me, because I will not slow down for those who cannot match Valorian standards." "Of course, Princess," he said with a small smile that showed no teeth, no challenge, no pride at all. "I will do my best to not burden you." She turned and walked toward the palace at her full stride, her powerful legs carrying her across the platform at a speed that would leave most species gasping. And she did not look back to see if the human followed, but she heard his footsteps behind her, soft and steady, and when she finally glanced over her shoulder, he was there, breathing a little harder, but keeping pace without complaint. This annoyed her more than if he had fallen behind the palace of the Valorian Empire rose before them like a mountain of gold and crimson stone, built by generations of warriors who had conquered half the sector through blood and claw and fury. And Sora felt pride swell in her chest at the sight of her home. Beautiful, the human said quietly. And she could not tell if he meant it or if he was simply trying to flatter Hirsch. Led him through the grand halls where statues of legendary warriors stood eternal guard, past the trophy rooms filled with the skulls of great beasts and fallen enemies, and through corridors where servants and nobles alike stopped to stare at the strange soft creature trailing behind their princess. Some of the warriors laughed openly at the sight, and one young lord pretended to stumble and shouldered the human hard enough to send him staggering. "My apologies," the lord said with a grin that showed all his fangs. "I did not see you there." Little prey thing, Sora watched the human and waited for anger or fear or some reaction that would prove he had a spine hidden somewhere in that soft body. But June simply steadied himself and offered the same gentle smile he had shown her at the landing platform. "No harm done," he said. "These halls are crowded and accidents happen. I hope you have a pleasant day." The young lord looked confused and then disgusted, and he walked away shaking his head at the weakness of human. Sora continued to the quarters she had assigned the ambassador, a small room in the servants' wing with a narrow bed and no windows, and she gestured for him to enter. "These will be your accommodations," she said. "I hope they are adequate." June looked at the tiny space and nodded without any change in his expression. "They are more than sufficient," he said. "Thank you for your hospitality, Princess. I am sure I will be very comfortable here." She wanted him to complain. She realized she wanted him to show some spark of pride that she could crush. But he gave her nothing. "Dinner will be served in the Great Hall at sunset," she said. "Formal attire is required, and I advise you not to speak unless spoken to. My people have little patience for those who do not know their place." "I understand," he said. "I will be silent and respectful, as a guest should be." Sora left him there and walked back through the palace with her claws clicking against the stone floors and her mind churning with frustration. She reported to her father in his private chambers, where the Emperor lounged on cushions made from the fur of creatures he had killed with his own hands. "The human?" he asked without looking up from the reports he was reading. "Pathetic," Sora said. "He bows to everyone. He apologizes for existing. He accepted servant quarters without a single word of protest. And I have never seen a creature so completely lacking in pride." Her father laughed, a deep rumbling sound that shook his massive chest. "Good," he said. "Let the galaxy see what Earth sends as its representative. And perhaps one day we will add humans to our collection of conquered species. They would make useful slaves, I think. Small enough to fit into tight spaces and too weak to ever rebel." Sora should have felt satisfied by this confirmation that her assessment was correct. But something nagged at her as she left her father and walked through the evening shadows of the palace. She found herself on a balcony overlooking the gardens, where the last light of sunset painted everything in shades of blood and gold. And she was not alone. The human stood on his own small balcony one level below, staring up at the three moons rising over the horizon. And in the fading light she could see his face clearly. The gentle smile was gone. His expression was empty and still like deep water, and his eyes reflected the moonlight in a way that made something ancient in her brain want to step back into the shadows and hide. Then he seemed to sense her watching, and his head turned upward, and their eyes met across the distance. Soft smile returned instantly like a mask sliding back into place, and he raised one hand in a small friendly wave. "Beautiful moons," he called up to her. "I have never seen three at once. Your world is truly magnificent." "Princess." Sora did not wave back, and she did not respond, and she told herself that what she had seen was nothing, just a trick of the light. just her imagination creating threats where none existed. But when she finally went to her own chambers and tried to sleep, she kept seeing those eyes in the moonlight, cold and patient and ancient. The eyes of something that had been watching and waiting for a very long time. She dreamed of being hunted through endless forests by something she could never see, something that never tired, something that smiled as it followed her trail. And she woke with her hearts pounding and her fur standing on end. It was nothing. She told herself as dawn broke over the spires of the palace. He was nothing. Humans were nothing, but she could not shake the feeling that she was missing something important, something dangerous, something that the galaxy had overlooked because it came wrapped in soft skin and gentle smiles.